The MPTF Media Center presents the international premiere podcast of Mystery Theater Audibles, Blackfire, a science fiction fantasy novel written and narrated by Anthony Lawrence, directed and produced by Madeline Smith Lawrence, produced by Jennifer Clymer, sound engineered by Marcus Murrieta.
Chapter 40. I was staring at Bert, my best friend, the field agent I had sent the DNA samples to in Reno. His face reflected the same kind of fear and total bewilderment that I had felt so often in the last few days. So Daniel was right when he said I would know who it was that had arrived uninvited at the resort. I had been assigned to eliminate the gatecrasher. I was stunned, shaken by the implication of seeing Bert. Astonishment and relief were added to his expression as he recognized me in the dim light that only slightly penetrated the night and the fog. "Bert," I stammered, gritting my teeth because I knew what this meant. But Bert only knew he was startled but incredibly relieved to see me. He bolted toward me and threw his arms around my neck. "Jesus Christ, Rafe, is it you? Am I dreaming? What the hell's going on?" "You're the gatecrasher," I said ruefully. "Gatecrasher? What are you talking about? I don't even know where the fuck I am." "You won't believe it when I tell you." "How'd you get here?" "Here? Where is here? I was looking for you. You were off the radar. We flew over the desert, and I didn't see shit or anything you told me about. Then something happened to the chopper, and we went down. It was crazy. We couldn't see through all the fog in the middle of the desert. We went down in the sand. I saw it at the last minute coming up at us. I heard the crash and explosion. I must have blacked out because I can't remember a thing until I woke up here. I don't know what happened to the pilot. Where the fuck am I? It's a nightmare, right? Tell me I'm just having a nightmare. I'm really in a hospital someplace in a state of shock, right?" "I wish I could tell you that, Bert. I wish I knew that was the truth, but it isn't. It's real. I know it doesn't seem real, but it is." How can it be? Unless we're on the set of some fucking movie. Is that what it is? A movie? No, Bert. It isn't a movie set. We're someplace in real London in the real 19th century. Of course, he looked at me like I had gone stark raving mad, and I wasn't quite sure that wasn't exactly the case. When you're dreaming, it all feels so real, but you have to wake up sometime, and I don't appear to be waking up. The dream just goes on and on. So maybe I really was just insane. That suddenly seemed the better of all the evils I was encountering. But what do you do when confronted with what appears to be totally illogical and incomprehensible? Well, you have little choice but to go with it, to go with the flow. "Bert, listen to me," I said to him imploringly. "I know it all seems crazy and just like a nightmare, but what I've been led to believe is that this is some kind of alternate universe." "What? A what?" Don't freak out on me, Bert. Sometimes I understand it, and sometimes I don't. I can't explain it any other way. The good news is somehow we're both still alive. Okay. I'm not sure I want to know what the bad news is. It may be just as difficult to understand, Bert. It was here that I slipped out my Glock 22 and leveled it at Bert's head. I'll never forget the look on his face in that moment. It was far more than shock and surprise in the normal sense of the word. It was the look of a man who had awakened in hell and was now confronting Satan himself. He was speechless, couldn't even stammer a response. I felt that I needed to explain myself. After all, I was about to kill my best friend. I certainly wanted him to understand my reasoning, but maybe it was really to make myself understand, if that were even possible. Look, Bert, I can't explain exactly what's going on here, why we're here in the middle of fucking Dickens' world, but I think it all has something to do with winning and losing. I know that doesn't mean anything just by itself, but gambling for things that are important, what we really care about, that means something. Now stay with me for a minute, okay? Remember that psych stuff we took in FBI class, Bert? The stuff about cultural anthropology. You know, the evolutionary biology explanation for why we kill. No, hey, don't try to talk. Just listen to me. It's like our behavior comes from our prehistoric, pre-human ancestors. Like we still have the capacity to kill. Sometimes it's because we were witnesses to violence when we were kids. Some people even think it's like a virus, like it's passed on from one person to another. Lots of reasons we kill each other. War, passion, self-defense. Bert just started shaking his head like he couldn't possibly believe what was happening. Rafe, cut it out, will you? You're scaring the shit out of me. I'm sorry, Bert. I don't want to make this more painful than it already is, but you've got to understand. Understand? I don't understand anything that's happening. Put the gun down. I tightened my grip on the pistol and waved it slightly in his face to make him see that I was serious. Bert, I wanted to kill that priest because he abused me when I was just a kid. Okay, that's legitimate, right? He deserves it, right? So what if it was old news? Lots of people celebrated our finally killing Osama bin Laden. What, it's okay to assassinate anybody now? Sure, he slaughtered thousands of people, but was it okay to just go and take him out? No trial, no justice under the law. People will be debating that one for years to come. Now, personally, I think the motherfucker deserved that and more. Look, there was that book they made us read. Remember? On Killing, by that Army Ranger. It was one of the definitive works on the subject. He was able to open a window into the soul of a warrior and explain why, even when directly threatened, it isn't simple to take another human being's life. But we do it all the time for one reason or another. You and me, we killed people. Well, maybe that was part of our job, but it's like something in our nature. We try to contradict it in lots of ways, but we really enjoy killing. It's built into us. We like it. Yeah, I know you're my best friend, Bert, but I have to do this of my own free will. Rafe, stop it. God damn it, you're not making any sense. Don't move, Bert. It's part of what we were taught. Remember? You're not dead until I tell you you're dead. That had to do with not giving up. What about the will to do the job? You are the weapon. Everything else is just a tool. Better him than me. Why did he make me kill him? Jesus, Rafe, that was just part of training, mental attitudes. But that's what I'm talking about, Bert. Mental attitude. Like those 3 simple things in order to survive a lethal encounter. This isn't a fucking encounter, Rafe. You're talking crazy. Put that thing down. Okay, look, I'm torn on this, Bert. I admit it. It's like that philosopher we studied. What the fuck was his name? Oh yeah, Critchley. Simon Critchley. He was torn on it too. He said maybe we're not just killer apes, but maybe we're killer apes with metaphysical longings. Like we've got some sort of longing for a meaning to our lives. Something whole and holy. It's like a conflict between the life of our desires, which are pretty destructive, and a desire for love and all the rest. I couldn't help myself. It was like I was going back and forth in my head, like someone was talking in my head, telling me what I had to say, what I had to do, working me on justification and reminding me of those 3 simple things to survive. The right weapon, the skill to use that weapon, and the mental decision to use it, even if it meant someone had to die. But right along with all that stuff coming into my mind, there was the brief thought that somehow this was all a fucking test of some kind, that I was like a puppet on strings and that Daniel was pulling the strings and trying to test my free will. But no matter how hard I tried to stay on that, my thoughts kept going back to the idea that somehow this was justice rather than vengeance, justified and necessary, not something to be glorified or celebrated. It was just something I had been taught to do and something that I really wanted to do. I was a special agent, and this was something we do without hatred or glee at someone's demise. We just do it. That's when the gun went off. Chapter 41. It was not human. The thing that rose up out of the purposeful, swirling motion of the waters in the sacred pond looked human, but it was definitely not. At first, it was just inward spiraling force, a kind of creative sucking motion without friction that resulted in increased order instead of destruction. Then it gradually took on a human form, but completely made of water, glistening, streams of itself cascading down, transparent yet revealing the outlines of what appeared to be that of a woman. It slowly became more structured as the swirling motion continued in a self-organizing flow with energetic oscillations that created a more symmetric pattern. The chaotic blustering became the body of a naked woman flowing upward out of living water. She was both beautiful and horrific, a slippery, shining evanescence of moving water, but with no face other than a mouth that shaped itself where a mouth should have been. It was a dark slice into the lower half of the head that pulsed and radiated as if trying to form itself into something that could produce speech. The form had a long, swan-like neck that held the head with its shape-shifting long tresses of flowing hair. The body had an exquisite design with long arms and beautifully curved legs, a supple torso, and breasts like large pink-toned bubbles that were perfectly contoured globes of changing light. But where the nipples should have been, there were two eyes, not human eyes, but more like the eye markings on the iridescent tail plumage of the peacock. They were staring, roundish eyes of gold hue with a dark blue center. They were staring at the man who stood nearby on the tesserae shelf of the pool. Daniel stopped his chanting incantation, but his own mouth opened wide. The Blackfire opal now erupted from the mouth of the watery figure in the pool. It seemed to float slowly from the bizarre figure directly back into Daniel's mouth. He swallowed the stone easily and then smiled at the human-like fountain that he seemed to have called forth from the dark water. "Thank you for coming," Daniel said softly. The mouth-like crevice in the creature's head quivered like it was trying to retain a memory of molecules it once contained. The voice that emerged was like the sound of distant wails, musical, but with a frightening edge to it like a screech. "Do you want to marry me, Daniel?" it asked. "Not yet." "But when?" "Soon." "Then what do you want of me?" "A favor, Ondine. Just a favor." Chapter 42. I was overcome with guilt. I had stood there after the gun went off, staring down at his crumpled body lying on the cobblestone street. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't squeezed the trigger, at least not consciously. The revolver had fired and the bullet had struck Bert square in the chest. I had managed to pull myself together and rush to him, but it was too late. He was gone. I had killed my best friend. How could I have done that? How could I have spewed all that crap about killing? It wasn't me. It was something inside my head. It was like telepathic hypnosis, a kind of mind control I had read about in one of those books we had for intelligence work. The Russians had been into it back in the old Soviet days. That was it. I thought of it before. Daniel was the puppet master, had been controlling my mind, pulling the strings, and had made me shoot Bert. Maybe that's just bullshit paranoia. Maybe it wasn't Daniel or mind control. Maybe it was just me. Maybe I really was just a sick son of a bitch. Maybe all those things I said was some sick delusional shit that came out of my twisted and perverted brain. Maybe everything that had been happening here was just stuff I was hallucinating. And killing Bert was just me wanting to kill somebody, anybody, because of my hate for that fucking priest. I just didn't know. I couldn't really tell. At that moment, hunched over Bert's still body, I didn't know anything except that I was overwhelmed with grief and guilt. After that, everything was kind of foggy. I remember dragging Bert's lifeless body across the cobblestone street and into what seemed to be a dark tavern or pub. I couldn't just leave him lying here on a dark street in the 19th century. It was bad enough I'd killed him, but I wasn't just going to leave him lying there in the dark in some crazy-ass world that couldn't even exist. I didn't know what the fuck I was going to do next, but somehow I just had to get Bert off the street. I guess I thought I'd worry about getting back to the resort later. The door to the pub was open and I dragged Bert inside, totally unaware at the time of the incongruous fact that there was a burning fire in a huge stone fireplace, but there wasn't a soul inside. Like I said earlier, I loved Charles Dickens, and I'd read everything of his, including sketches by Boz, in which he described many of these illegal and unlicensed establishments of the time as bawdy, loud, and unruly drinking dens that increasingly came to be held as unbridled cesspits of immorality or crime and the source of much ill health and alcoholism among the working classes. But I wasn't thinking about any of that at the time, or I would have noted the contradictions of the dead silence, lack of any bawdy occupants, and a fire blazing in the hearth. All I remember about the pub itself were the dancing shadows, the frosted glass windows, and tapped wooden barrels lying on a table in the corner of the room. There was nobody in the pub, just me and a dead man. I was in too much pain to recognize the further curious nature of a bottle of gin sitting conveniently on a table in the center of the room. I wasn't thinking much of anything either, except that I wanted to get drunk, and a bottle of gin could ease the pain I was feeling. So I sat, and I drank, and I kept on drinking while I waited for the inevitable stupor that might bring a blissful end to my suffering. But while the gin was as powerful as any I'd ever had before, I couldn't seem to lose the anguish that had swept over me. The liquor only intensified the guilt and remorse, and I began to weep pitiably. Then, slowly through the torpor of my drunkenness and grief, I became aware of 4 figures sitting at the table with me. At first, they were completely indistinct, but as my mind struggled to comprehend their existence, I recognized them. They were not frightening or threatening characters. They were my friends. I had grown up with them. I knew them like I knew myself. I welcomed their presence like I might have welcomed my own brothers if I had any. But the sight and knowledge that they were there with me only deepened my emotion, and I continued to weep, my body racked by the continuing grief of loss. I felt the light and comforting touch of a young man's hand on my shoulder, and I heard his gentle voice. Heaven knows we need never be ashamed of our tears, my dear Wraith, for they are rain upon the blinding dust of earth, overlying our hard hearts. It was Pip from Great Expectations, and he appeared to me now as the young gentleman he had become with the aid of that strange man named Magwitch. Pip had a kind face and eyes, and was dressed in the Victorian style of the period, frock coat, wide necktie in a loose knot, and fastened with a stick pin. His comforting smile warmed me, and I stared at him and the others while trying to gather myself and stop the ebb of my tears. David Copperfield and Nicholas Nickleby wore similar clothing, high upstanding collars, wide cravats, and tight-fitting breeches. Nicholas wore a top hat, but David, according to his liberal nature, had seemed to choose a working-class bowler hat. They also smiled cheerily at me, as I then glanced at the 4th figure, who was still a boy of perhaps 10 years old. It was my favorite of all my childhood images, Oliver, and his sweet face and boyish smile completed the happy reunion. Oliver was simply dressed in a shirt and leathers with muffin cap, the flat wool cap worn by charity school boys. His innocent earnestness as he spoke touched my heart with its plea for a simple appreciation of life as he had found it after the darker days he had spent in the London streets. The words were just as I remembered them from the novel Dickens had written, but they seemed to apply directly to me and what I was feeling. "It's so good to see you, dear Rafe. I know how melancholy you are, but it may be possible to arise tomorrow morning in better heart." "But I've killed my best friend," I said bitterly. "Ah," old chum offered Pip gently and with obvious understanding. "Throughout life, our worst weaknesses and meannesses are usually committed for the sake of the people whom we most despise." "I'm sure that's what I did, Pip, but it's broken my heart." "Some people, I believe," added Nicholas as he put his arm around me, "have no hearts to break. It seems but yesterday that we were playfellows, Rafe, and it will seem but tomorrow when we are staid old people, looking back to cares as we look back now. Perhaps when we are quaint old folks and talk of the times when our step was lighter and our hair not gray, we may be even thankful for the trials that turned our lives into this current." Oliver hunkered down close to me and touched my hand. "My dear Uncle Rafe, you must remember when dawn breaks and the birds sing in their old places and sweet wild flowers are all about, that your melancholy may be dispelled as if by magic. Men who look on nature and their fellow men and cry that all is dark and gloomy are in the right, but the somber colors are reflections from their own jaundiced eyes and hearts. The real hues are delicate and need a clearer vision." "And it is that very vision, dear friend," said David as he moved closer to me, "that will determine whether you shall turn out to be the hero of your own life, or whether that station will be held by anybody else." My head was down as he spoke those final words, and his voice began to drift off into the distance. When I finally glanced up, the 4 boyhood friends were gone, and there was someone else sitting in one of their chairs. Chapter 43. Jordan knew she had won. Her 10-8 was not a strong hand, but it was enough to beat Daniel's 9-7. He smiled wryly at her across table 18, struck by the synchronicity. 18 on table 18. Quite a stroke of good fortune, Jordan. Aside from 0, it is the only number that equals twice the sum of its decimal digits. But of course that means little to you. Perhaps the fact that the Hebrew word for life, chai, has a numerical value of 18, and the fact that the ancient Roman number 18 symbolized a blood relative mean a great deal more. Jordan brushed back the blonde hair from her face in a weary gesture, stared bitterly at Daniel for a moment. She was relieved she had won, but unconvinced she had actually won anything. She was fatigued both mentally and emotionally from her experiences, and still not sure they were the results of delusion or trickery. But somehow she had been comforted by the young priest and his connections to her early life. She wasn't sure she could trust him, but she knew that she had to make the effort to do what she could for Cody, even if it seemed completely outrageous and impossible. It was the priest who had told Samanya to come to her room, that she was ready to make her second wager. Father Matus was convinced that it was possible for me to get my son back by winning my second bet. I've won, and I'm holding you to the wager despite my still lingering doubts. You needn't worry about my holding up my end of the wager, Jordan. Father Matus was quite correct in encouraging you to come back to the table. You have indeed won, and Cody will be returned to you in due time. Due time. Oh, I knew there was a catch to it. No catch, Jordan. But there are few things as difficult to accomplish as resurrection. Resurrection? You mean like Jesus? She couldn't avoid the sarcasm and skepticism of her nature, but Daniel didn't seem to mind. He just smiled in a kind of wistful look of understanding and shrugged. Oh, the term, while acceptable in certain religious and spiritual contexts, is typically not used in medical circles to describe the return to life of one who was clinically dead, although rare extreme cases are properly classified as examples of the Lazarus syndrome, a term originating from the biblical resurrection story. In ancient Greece, Asclepius was killed by Zeus only to... Jordan couldn't help herself. She interrupted impatiently, her anger rising exponentially. Look, I'm not here for some goddamn lecture. I don't know what you can do or what the hell you can't do. I'm sick and tired of you messing with my head. Okay, so you made me think I was wasted and brought me back to life. Maybe it happened and maybe it didn't. Just even making me think it was happening was a fucking rotten trick, and I hate you for it. But either you come through on the wager right now, or I'm out of here, one way or the other. She was on her feet and prepared to leave and run, find some way out of this purgatory. But Daniel reacted calmly and with assurance. There was something in his eyes, however, that chilled Jordan and kept her from bolting out of the room. As I told you before, we have our rules, Jordan, curious as they may seem. Unfortunately, you are unable to collect your second wager until you have fulfilled the terms of your first, remember? 3 lives of a mother are of equal worth to 1 life of a child. You've only died and come back once. Jesus H. Christ, then why in hell did you let me play this hand? Well, you may not believe it, but I'm not completely without some measure of empathy, Jordan. Because of your history as a dealer, and a very good one, I must add, I was willing to make a slight exception in your case. Now I know there's definitely a catch. Daniel laughed somewhat sardonically. I do admire your perceptiveness, Jordan. There is a catch, as you put it, but it is in the spirit and nature of the game. In this room, no matter our good intentions, we must never provide something without the potential for gaining something as well. That's the rule and the absolute truth. Okay, so give me the rest. What's in it for you? Well, let me put it this way. It's very late. The night will be over in about 6 hours. If you avoid a second death experience in the next 3 hours, which would bring us to 3 a.m., I will tell you where you can find Cody. At that time, you and your son will be free to leave the resort without any further obligation. If I avoid, that's cute. Even if you should happen not to do so, you have my promise upon your own second resurrection to no longer be obligated to the third death. That will be afforded you as a good faith credit. Now, you must admit that's a fair agreement. Jordan thought for only a brief moment. It might be if there was the slightest reason in the world why I should trust you. Well, I'm not requiring your trust, Jordan, only your agreement. Do I have that? You have 3 hours. You can go back and stay in your room, lock the door, take a nap, relax, do anything you like. The odds are definitely in your favor. At exactly 3 a.m., I will send someone to take you to your son, and you can take Cody home. That is my promise to you. Jordan really wanted to tell Daniel to take his offer and shove it up his ass, but she knew she couldn't. She had no choice but to play his unimaginable little game until the end. Chapter 44. The VIP wore a black hooded robe that totally hid its face and somewhat grotesquely proportioned body. Even its arms were crossed, what might have been its hands tucked inside the loose black sleeves. It looked like a hunchbacked monk from some distant exotic monastery. But despite its Caliban-like, somewhat human shape, nothing could be seen of the twisted figure within. Only darkness where its face and head would be. Light flickered from a nearby fireplace and shadows danced on the walls of the large, elegantly furnished suite. Slowly, the hooded, hulking figure of the VIP began to rotate, as if it were standing on a large, lazy Susan. The rotation steadily increased, the black robe billowing out and opening like an umbrella, until the figure started to blur and its shape began to totally lose its structure. It remained roughly the same size, but its metamorphosis appeared to transform it from a human-like shape into a smaller mass of dark matter, whirling atoms and molecules, particles spinning like some mini black hole in the center of the room. Faster and faster the streams of particles accelerated, the small black mass building within itself great energy, power, and deviousness. Chapter 45. It was Orrin who now sat directly across from me in the chair that had been occupied by David Copperfield. I was neither surprised nor alarmed. Under any other circumstances, it might have startled me. But for some reason, here and now, it seemed almost a natural occurrence, as if I had actually been expecting my Dickens friends to leave and Orrin to arrive. Of course, I was no closer to understanding or coping with my grief or guilt, or how I might deal with my dilemma, but I instantly felt relieved, because I was sure that if anyone could help me, it would be the man who knew everything. Orrin took the half-empty bottle of gin from which I had been drinking, tipped it up to his mouth, and consumed a good deal of the transparent alcohol. He then wiped his mouth with his sleeve and smiled at me. "How did you find me, Orrin?" I asked, knowing full well that the answer might be inexplicable. I was certainly correct. Well, I worked it out mathematically. It has to do with the curvature of space-time. It's all about speed, breaking the speed of light. It took me a while because just knowing something doesn't always mean you can actually do it. Baby universes are being created inside black holes. There it goes again, I'm sorry. The gin will soon modify my data stream. He quickly took another long swallow of gin to suppress the flow of information streaming into his brain. I took the moment to change the subject and to reveal Bert's death. "I killed my best friend, Orrin," I said ruefully as I pointed to Bert's still form on the floor nearby. "Yes, I know, that was actually Daniel's work, of course." I had that feeling, but it was still me who pulled the trigger. "Forgive me, Rafe, but we have more important things to discuss than your guilt. It seems that you have now become as much of a threat to Daniel as I am." "A threat? How do you figure that?" "Well, for one thing, you still have free will, and for another, you came here on your own." "Came here? To 19th century London? How the hell could I do that?" His answer was accompanied by a sly smile. "With my help, I computed a way to change the router in your head. It's sometimes a bottleneck of processing, despite the fact that the human brain is the most complex structure that exists in any of the universes." He paused to pop his ears with the palms of both hands. Then he spoke quickly with an almost painful intensity. "You see, Rafe, all people have latent powers of the mind, but there are overriding brain functions, the routers, the processing that slows it down, kind of like a traffic jam. For better or worse, I got privileged access because of my wager. But the absence of the psychological refractory period can be a matter of life and death. I'm sorry, Orrin, but I don't know what the hell you're talking about." Yes, of course you don't. But then my problem doesn't really matter. My processing is totally life-altering, for better and worse. But I was able to help you just make a small quantum jump. Oh, no, it's all right. You don't need to understand, except that your thoughts were able to actually create what you needed. First it was a retreat, and then it became comfort and solace. It was simpler than you might think, just some slight tweaking of things, a speed booster in your eyes, some neurons firing a little sooner. I still couldn't follow him. I tried to interrupt to tell him I was totally baffled, but he just kept on going like a man suddenly possessed with the knowledge of impending doom. "Rafe, now listen to me, and don't interrupt. Things are beginning to happen at the resort. The VIPs are beginning to move." "The VIPs? Who the fuck are they?" "Please, Rafe, this is strictly on a need-to-know basis, and that you don't need to know. They're not yet a major threat to Jordan." "Jordan? Where is she? What happened to her?" "Please, you must hear me out so that you can go back and help her. It's Ondine's curse." "Ondine's curse? What the hell is that?" "Something Daniel's come up with to alter the outcome of Jordan's wager. Let's just say he has certain mythological connections that he is able to access. I know it all sounds bizarre, Rafe, but you must understand what we're dealing with here. It isn't anything you could even possibly imagine. Now, we've got to obtain the Blackfire opal, but we have to all stay alive in order to do it. You must try and believe what I tell you. 3 of the most rare and unpredictable things in existence are at work here: human thought, non-human thought, and random probability. Chaos. Right now, we must save Jordan from Ondine's curse. Yeah, you keep saying that, but I still don't have a goddamn clue what you're talking about. Oren didn't blink. He went on to explain that its name was a reference to the myth of Ondine, a water nymph who had an unfaithful mortal lover. He swore to her that his every waking breath would be a testimony of his love, and upon witnessing his adultery, she cursed that if he should fall asleep, he would forget to breathe. Eventually, he fell asleep from sheer exhaustion, and his breathing stopped. It's a very rare and serious form of central sleep apnea, said Oren. A failure of autonomic control of breathing, chemical signals, non-local quantum computing, and entanglement among DNA. Oren quickly grabbed the bottle of gin and took another deep swallow. Then he tried to gather himself, struggling mightily to continue the train of thought. Rafe, look, you must get back now and prevent Jordan from falling asleep. This is ridiculous, Oren. No, if Jordan falls asleep, it could kill her, but not in the way that her wager describes. Now, because of Ondine's curse, it will be permanent. Chapter 46. It was called The Conjurer's Club. Its entrance was not far from the Table 18 room. It had a darkly Gothic look with twin white alabaster-winged griffins guarding the peaked-wide doorway where some well-dressed resort guests were entering. Jordan moved toward the entrance, feeling a little woozy from the 2 gin fizzes she had downed at the bar. She had been on her way to the elevator to go up to her room and stay there as Daniel had advised. He had said she would be safe there, but she wasn't so sure she'd be safer there than anywhere else. Anything can happen in a dream, and if she was going insane, then it wasn't going to matter where she went because her psychotic mind would invent something crazy and deadly. So she had just said, fuck it, and went to the bar. She had downed the 2 gin fizzes quickly, but the idea of just getting wasted had lessened as she thought about the things Daniel had said after she had won her bet to bring Cody back to life. She had laughed bitterly at her own foolishness in believing anything he had said. But nothing was making any sense, and she just found herself more confused than ever. She felt she might clear her mind a little better if she just walked around and looked at the people. There was something about being in a crowd of people that made her feel a little more in touch with reality. Then perhaps her luck might change and she would run to Rafe. Maybe that was just too much to ask. God only knew what had happened to him or what he was thinking about her after seeing her in the hotel suite with Samanya. Jordan stopped to look at the large lobby poster outside the Conjurer's Club. Magnus and Morpheus, Conjurers Extraordinaire, Bizarre and Gospel Magic. Beneath the show card Gothic graphic lettering were 2 iconic images. One was of a brazen head, a seemingly brass or bronze mechanical face in the form of a human head. The second image was the exquisitely beautiful face of a young Greek god, painted by an apparently unknown medieval artist. Jordan stared at the rather garish poster. She had seen many of the great Vegas illusionists, Copperfield, Chris Angel, David Blaine, and Lance Burton. She had marveled at their various spectacular effects, but she knew they were just visual tricks created with mechanical devices, sleight of hand distraction and optical illusions, computer graphic images and mirrors. She never heard of Magnus and Morpheus. They sounded like small-time circuit magicians who had managed to obtain a gig in this fantastic resort. Jordan remembered something about bizarre magic, that it used storytelling and wordplay with a focus on the theatrical. It was the kind of magic that was sometimes disturbing and made people uncomfortable, with a creepy feeling that what they've just experienced might have been real. It was then that a different take about Magnus and Morpheus entered her mind. Maybe they were really unique and incredible illusionists who were actually responsible for all the wild things that she thought might be dreams or concoctions of her deteriorating mind. Somebody had to be responsible for what had been happening, and it made more sense that perhaps these in-house magicians were talented hypnotists and were behind the whole thing. Jordan followed the line of guests entering the club and found herself in a darkened theater with seats in a semicircle around a platform stage. She wondered briefly why there had been no box office or charge for entering, but she quickly became distracted and fascinated by the interior. There seemed to be no wings and no backstage, just the platform at the center of a very large, dome-shaped structure. The curving walls were beautifully illustrated with a variety of darkly surreal, archaic visions depicting Hindu, Veda, and monist philosophies demarcating illusion from truth and falsehood, as well as medieval styled frescoes of gospel magician holidays like St. Don Bosco's feast day, St. Nicholas Owen, the stage illusionist's holiday, and St. Dismas, the good thief, who was crucified alongside Christ and was considered the patron of reformed thieves and pickpockets. As she was closing in on a seat by the aisle, Jordan was beginning to have feelings of apprehension and some regret that she had come in here to satisfy her curiosity about these unknown magicians. How was she going to know if they were involved in what had been occurring to her? If she suspected them, was she going to seek them out and ask them? Not likely. There was something about this place that was only making her feel more vulnerable, and she suddenly felt like turning tail and bolting out of the theater, but she couldn't seem to do it. She sank slowly into her seat with growing alarm and a pervasive sense of impending doom. Chapter 47. Miguel felt exhilarated. Not since the explosion in Afghanistan had darkened his world had he felt such exhilaration. He was living in an incredible environment with all the trappings of a kind of luxury this street kid from East LA could never have contemplated. And there was even the possibility that he might regain his sight. That, of course, seemed hardly possible, but he had gone along with the fantasy, and anything that went even the slightest degree beyond what he was now enjoying would just be the topping on a beautiful cake that already tasted really good. He was pumping away on the stationary bicycle in his bedroom, and even though he could not see anything, he was richly enjoying the experience, not only because he had never been on one of these bikes before, but also because in his mind he could imagine whatever he wanted. For Miguel, he was not stationary at all. He was riding along a bike trail through a fabulous forest of tall trees, elegant ferns, and occasional glimpses of animals he could remember from his childhood school field trip visits to the Griffith Park Zoo. A ring-tailed raccoon scampered out of the way of his bike, and he saw a buck deer grazing in the tall grass nearby. He could see the rushing streams that curled alongside the bike trail, and he could see himself stopping the bike so that he might, for the first time in his life, fish in a stream for the rainbow trout he had read about in a book. But the fantasy ended, and he got slowly off the bike with some degree of impatience. Somehow, despite his inherent cynicism, he had expected, maybe hoped was a better word, that his wager at Table 18 would come true, and that suddenly he would really see again. But so far his world was still dark, and he still had to reach out in front of him to make his way anywhere he wanted to go. Right now he was feeling his way to the bathroom, going by his instincts and tactile determination. As Miguel made his way into the bathroom, managed to take off his shorts and t-shirt, find a towel and turn on the shower, he was totally unaware that something strange, which he couldn't see or hear, was emerging in the room with him. It was like dust or smoke at first, filtering into the room right up from the floor, unaffected by the thick tiles because it was made up of energy and superheated, orbiting and spiraling material that moved through solid mass as if it didn't exist. Miguel slipped into the warm shower, and the soft water caressing his body calmed the frustration he had been feeling in the last few moments since leaving the bike. He slathered soap on and gleefully washed his body thoroughly. Even without sight, he could always do that well. His touch was keen, and he enjoyed the feeling of cleansing water as if it could actually clean away the ghastly memories of the explosion and its aftermath. When he finished with the soap and had cleared his body of the slippery feeling, he reached out and managed to find one of those really heavy and luxurious hotel towels. He was unaware that he was standing in front of a full-length door mirror until suddenly he became startlingly conscious of the fact that he was beginning to see traces of his own image confronting him. It was blurred at first, but soon became crystal clear. He was beginning to see. The sudden comprehension of sight was stunning, and he was overcome with emotion as he stared at his naked body in the mirror. It was just as he remembered it before that awful day in Afghanistan. He had seen it so many times without really looking at it as he was looking at it now. It was much whiter than he remembered and much thinner, and he thought somewhat ruefully, a good deal older. But his body was not the only thing he was aware of. There was something else that grabbed his attention, something that was in stark contrast to the elegance of the bathroom decor. It was a dark mass that loomed up behind him in the mirror. What the fuck is that? It was the last conscious thought of his very own that Miguel would have. Many black holes pass through Earth every day, but those tiny black holes, smaller than an atom, don't swallow much matter and simply trap atoms and some larger molecules into circling orbits in much the same way that protons in atoms capture and bind electrons. There is no event horizon with many black holes. An object can escape from being drawn into a mini black hole. But this seeming black hole had greater mass and definitely had an event horizon that was beginning to devour Miguel. It appeared to be a living thing. Though it was devoid of color, it was composed of energy, superheated dense matter expanding and cooling, and was scintillating with electrical charges and arcs. Its devouring of Miguel seemed to be more of a pervading penetration. Rather than drawing him into its own field, it was permeating his very being with its atoms and molecules. Miguel's naked body became rigid and began to glow with the radiation suffusing his being. Then the image of him in the mirror slowly relaxed as the black matter dissipated, and then disappeared completely, leaving the man who had once been blind and weak and vulnerable, now exuding power and confidence. The grin that appeared on his face turned into an expression of exultation, and he began to laugh, as of someone feeling triumphant. But it wasn't Miguel who was feeling that way. The thing that had once been a young Hispanic human being stared into the mirror at the reflection of something quite different. The new Miguel reached out and touched the glass. He saw a young face that no longer belonged to its original owner. The eyes that had once been a dark brown were now black as two holes in space, black like the eyes of a cosmic ghost, like primordial matter that emitted a spiraling energy with charged particles. Then it touched its own face and ran its fingers down along its new body, the laughter building as it examined its own now mortal flesh. Miguel, or that which had been Miguel, turned and left the bathroom and stared around at the lavish suite. The VIP appeared, drawn to the stationary bicycle that Miguel had been riding earlier. Naked, but with no human self-consciousness, the VIP moved to the bike and mounted it smoothly, beginning to pump the pedals with curious expectation and continued acceleration. The powerful legs wildly spun the stationary mechanism to its farthest capability as the creature laughed and seemed to be enjoying the exercise bike with even greater excitation than Miguel had experienced earlier. But the machine was not built to withstand the power in these new legs, and as the pumping increased to an extreme level, the entire bicycle began to fly apart, an explosion of metallic debris that flew around the room, scattering lamps, planters, pictures from the walls, smashed out one of the massive windows. The breaking glass and the laughter echoed through the suite and out into the night, which was as black as the eyes of the new VIP.